Years ago, I realized that if I were to write the screenplay for the movie of my own life, it would have a number of really interesting features. For instance, every book I wrote would be a New York Times bestseller. Every sermon I preached would move my congregation to tears and get them shouting hallelujahs in the aisles. My wife would laugh at all of my stupid jokes, and my kids would think that I'm the coolest dad ever. And I would never encounter any situation or challenge that I wasn't absolutely calm and collected and sure of my success. And of course, I would succeed in those challenges. And I realized, would I really want to watch that movie?
I'd love to.
And okay, we have one taker there. So if any more, I'll start a Kickstarter campaign and start that movie. But really, I thought I would be bored to death. And I realized if I wouldn't want to watch that film, why would I want to live that life? In this series, we're exploring the lives of individuals who have discovered the work of their soul in the soul of their work. And often they've discovered their soul's work through not through simply their glorious successes, but in and through their struggles. In fact, it's in and through their struggles, not apart from them, that they've found a path that brings them more fully alive as individuals and enables them to more fully express their love for God and neighbor. Tonight, helping us explore these issues is none other than Darkwood Brew producer Scott Griessel, who's also the owner of Creatista and Red Star Productions, and he'll be here to talk about the call to uncertainty. Yes, the call to uncertainty. Would you mind reading our Pneuma passage for us before we go any further?
I would be happy to.
Okay. Tonight's every week we focus discussion around a particular passage. Tonight's which we call our Pneuma Domina passage. Tonight's reading is from Exodus chapter 13, verses 17 through 22.
Great, thank you. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of land of the Philistines, although that was nearer. For God thought, if the people face war, they may change their minds and return to Egypt. So God led the people by the roundabout way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of the land of Egypt prepared for battle. And Moses took with him the bones of Joseph, who had required a solemn oath of the Israelites, saying, God will surely take notice of you, and then you must carry my bones with you from here. They set out from Succoth and camped at Etham, on the edge of the wilderness. The Lord went in front of them in a pillar of cloud by day, to lead them along the way, and in a pillar of fire by night, to give them light, so that they might travel by day and by night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people.
The story of the Exodus is an amazing story that gives a lot of inspiration and hope, but it's also a story that is a prolonged reflection on uncertainty and what it does in our relationship with each other and with God. In fact, it's really an extended expression of how we must actually step out into the wilderness of uncertainty in order to build a trust relationship with God. It's kind of interesting, though, that so much of religion oftentimes promises us certainty, but religion does us really no service at all when it promises just exactly that, certainty. In fact, if you look at the biblical tradition, all the great heroes of faith, whether you look at Moses or Abraham or Sarah or King David or any of the prophets, they all dealt with high levels of uncertainty and had to develop comfort levels with that. In fact, one could even say that their faith drove them deeper into the thicket of uncertainty. The New Testament didn't magically solve that and bring us all certainty with Jesus. In fact, if you look at the figures like Peter, Paul, or even Jesus himself, all these people also had to deal with profound uncertainties in their lives. And again, their faith seemed to drive them deeper there. Curiously, when you look at the Bible, the only people who actually crave certainty, for whom certainty is a high value, are the villains. Yeah, the villains. And so likewise, when we look at the traditions today that promise high levels of certainty, isn't it interesting that those are the very faith expressions where their adherents are the most frenzied and hysterical? A faith built on certainty is like a house built on cards. It collapses immediately when the foundations tremble even slightly. And let's face it, life is messy, and no amount of doctrine or dogma gets us around that. Faith must, a holistic faith, a mature faith, must be one that includes uncertainty, but it's not simply about being uncertain. There's something about uncertainty, actually, that produces something very special. But if we look at our passage, who is it that craves certainty? It's Pharaoh. Pharaoh has got his strategic plan, his 5, 10, 15-year building plan. He knows exactly when his pyramids are going to be built, and they're going to be built on budget and on time. And in order to accomplish that, he's willing to exploit a whole population of people, make them slaves, make them work for next to nothing. And when Pharaoh is confronted by Moses, and Moses suggests, well, maybe it's not about strategic planning, but strategic faithfulness, and let my people go, he resists. That doesn't go along with the plan. That takes away his certainty. And so he resists all the more, and Moses keeps coming back with more and more signs from God, ratcheting up the plagues and so forth, until Pharaoh is basically faced with a Woody Allen dilemma. To paraphrase Woody Allen, he once said, "Two roads lie before us. One leads to pain and suffering, and the other to total annihilation. May God help us choose the right one." That's the choice that finally this one who craves so much certainty, it's not until he's certain about total annihilation that he finally lets those people go. But there's another part of the story that is largely unwritten. It's hinted at throughout the rest of the narrative, but I wonder about the slaves themselves. When Moses came and said, "Hey, we've got it. Pharaoh's given us the golden ticket. We can leave. We're free." I wonder if everyone was as excited as everyone else. When you're going to go, where are you going to go to? And it's a big wilderness out there, and it's dangerous. And where are you going to find food? Where are you going to find shelter? And any place that had arable land was already inhabited by peoples who wouldn't necessarily be so thrilled to have a whole bunch of people descending upon their lands. In fact, if they were to read ahead in the narrative, they'd find plenty of struggle ahead. So you can imagine, probably, more than a few of those slaves thinking, life's not so good here, that's for sure, but then again, I know where my next meal's coming from. And I know I get up, I go to work, and I come home, and I'm exhausted, but I have a place to put my head. And this is where I've lived all my life. This is where my kids have lived all their lives. It's a mighty disruption to things. Given the choice between something crappy but that's known and the great unknown, not everybody's so happy to simply fly and be free, escaping slavery. But it's in the midst of this drama that God comes to them in an unusual way, comes through a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of cloud during the day, inviting them forward, not simply into then the great unknown, but into relationship. And that's where uncertainty is really not the goal. God never simply calls us into uncertainty for its own sake, but rather calls us to take a step out into that great unknown in order to follow where God leads. That makes the story a lot more exciting when you are not following a strategic plan, not following a roadmap that has every point carefully mapped out that you can now decide, well, should I leave or shall I not? But rather, moment by moment, the decisions have to be made. Shall I follow or shall I not? Not knowing from one time to the next where that promised land will be found. Now that makes for an interesting movie. Maybe they ought to make a movie about that one of these days.
Sounds like a great idea. You and me.
That's
Let's
right.
do it.
People know you as the producer of Darkwood Brew, but you do actually a lot of things. You're a pretty busy man, actually.
I do. You know, it's a little bit of a terrifying question sometimes at a cocktail party if somebody asks me what I do, not because I don't know what I do, but because I know that the answer is probably longer than what they had hoped for when they asked the question to begin with. But my company's called Creatista, and we've been around in the form that we're in for about 10, 12 years now. And we do commercial work, high-end commercial work, particularly for car companies. And that's a little piece of what we do, but it's nice when it comes up, shoot at places like Warner Brothers and Universal Studios and pretend like we're Hollywood and have fun. A real passion of our company lies in something that we do in more film and video work than we really do on the commercial side. Commercials is kind of where I came from. We do a lot of work for not-for-profits and for agencies that are really out doing what we perceive to be good in the world. So I work for AIDS organizations and places that are working to help people with pathways out of poverty, people that are helping to address the issue of homelessness and what we can do for folks that are in that situation. And we do a lot of that work, and really that's something that's really kind of soothing to our souls. We really like doing that. Then there's a whole other piece of what we do, which is I'm a commercial photographer. So I take commissions to do all kinds of work from events to product stuff. And then in addition to that, there's a little sort of niche of photography, which is called stock photography. Not many people out there do it, not many photographers do it, but it's something that we embraced fairly early on. So we have a portfolio of about 13,000 stock photographs that we sell, and we're always growing that portfolio, and that's also really fun because you do a lot of stuff with people.
I once saw one of your photographs just come up on the screen of the Jimmy Fallon show.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I've been on the cover of, not I've, but the work that I've done, cover of lots of magazines, and it's a funny thing because most of the time when we sell an image, I don't necessarily know where. So I sell hundreds of images a day, and they go all over the world. And so often I'm watching the Facebook feed go by, and I'll see, oh, that's one of mine, or people send them to me, or I'll see something on TV. I see things in the sets on TV shows sometimes, and it'll be a poster in somebody's room. It'll incorporate a photo that I did. So that's fun, to kind of have that connection. And then additionally, in large part, thanks to, I think, the relationship that you and I have. I mean, we're kind of forming that a little bit before you and I really met, way over a decade ago. But I do this kind of crazy Christian media stuff, which I also take a lot of pride in and really enjoy doing.
Your specialty is the crazy stuff.
Then my specialty is the
like
crazy
us.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So that's why I'm here in Omaha. So after crazy, it's snowing outside, and I'm from Tucson, so I've got to be a little crazy just to be here. So I produce Darkwood Brew. I also work with Living the Questions and producing some of the materials that they put out, which some people may be familiar with. And I've worked for Center for Progressive Christianity and the denomination that we belong to, which is the United Church of Christ, and lots of others, again, trying to kind of help move some of the things that we're working for along in the world. So we have a lot of different things that we do, and that's why I'm so terrified when somebody asks me at a cocktail party.
Right, yeah, that's right. Well, what if somebody were asking ask you, I mentioned the screenplay of my own life I wouldn't even watch. What if somebody were to ask you, and in fact I will ask you, what makes for an interesting film? What gets us engaged in a storyline as a filmmaker?
I think that when it comes to either narrative or documentary, and I've done a little bit of work in narrative, which for narrative would be what people tend to think of when you go see a movie and there's a story. And I've done some short films and things like that, but I've done a lot of either documentary work or documentary style work. And interestingly, I think this is true in both cases. But we don't want the certain answer. I think if we did walk into the film of your life and we could call it within the first 5 minutes, we wouldn't stick around for the rest of it. But if we had a sense that there were going to be some plot twists along the way, I think we actually find those plot twists to be deeply satisfying. It's probably one of I love BBC mysteries, so I know that about every 5 minutes I'm going to have the rug pulled out from underneath me, and whatever I thought was going on is not what was going on. It's going to be something else. And maybe maybe it's sort of a deep level. I studied film in school, and so we sat around and talked endlessly about this stuff, but maybe one of the reasons that we connect to that so much, I think, is that may be part of how we're wired as people to look for that kind of a plot twist, and to I don't know if we necessarily have a certain comfort level with it, but to at least know that it's coming, right?
Well, I wonder whether we're wired or not. It seems like that the kind of those continual plot twists are truer to actually the way we live our lives.
Yeah, I think that's true. Any sort of film that you go watch in a theater is, unless it's actually a real-time film, which happens very seldom, is kind of a compression of time. So I hope they don't come quite as fast as they do in a Michael Bay movie, because I don't want everything blowing up around me every 3 or 4 minutes. But I do think that there is a sense of anxiety and uncertainty that filmmakers are really going for. And they know a lot of tricks to make you feel more anxious and more anxiety. But again, I think maybe sort of mirroring some of the experiences that we have in our lives and sort of digging kind of deep into that.
Yeah. Well, when colleges these days are preparing their students for careers that actually haven't even yet been envisioned.
Right.
There's some anxiety there.
Yeah.
How do we even prepare people to prepare for something that we don't even know exists right now? Yeah, it's a lot. Right. A lot of plot twists in between. Yeah,
absolutely. And I've had a few on my own.
Yeah?
Yes.
So we have kind of these films that what makes it interesting are these twists and turns, and I imagine that to make it a true plot twist, you can't simply predict that the twist is going to turn out good. Sometimes it's got to turn out bad, otherwise you just know that it's just going to go from better to better to better.
Right.
It's kind of, but that's not the way life works either, and that I know that hasn't been necessarily your own path.
No, that's true. I can really think of a lot of instances of that, but because we're talking about filmmaking and production, there's one in particular that comes to mind, which is just about a decade ago, close to that. I formed a company with 2 other partners, good people. 2 other companies, we'd worked together. It all seemed to make sense. It made sense on paper. And we put a company together. We had about 12 employees. We were profitable. We had a lot of our ego stake in our community in this company. And within a year, we ended up taking it back apart because it was just some things amongst the partners that didn't work out the way that we had hoped that they would. And that was probably one of the most, definitely one of the most professionally difficult things that I've ever dealt with. It was very painful. And it was certainly not what we expected when we put the company together. Now, we knew that stepping into something that we wouldn't necessarily know where it was going, but we certainly didn't envision that would have been the result, that within a year later we were tearing it back apart and figuring out how to divide up money and assets and things like that. So yeah, that was a very very difficult but also a very instructional time for me.
Yeah. imagine part of what made it more difficult too is I remember even you at the time, you kind of sensing I don't know what language you would have put around it at the time, but some said it sort of draw, some said it's call. You might even say to that way of working yourself out in the world through that.
Yeah, I do. You're absolutely right about that. And one of the funny things is that when you talk about sense of call, is part of that sense of call came from a call from you. And anytime you call me,
blame it on me.
You call me and you start with, "This is going to be kind of a strange idea. I know we're in problematic territory." And that was the case with this one. You had called me about the time we were forming this company and said, "Hey, we're in a discernment process with this group of progressive Christians who's looking at carrying a different message about Christianity from Phoenix to Washington, D.C. We're going to walk it, and we'd like to put the word out." And within about 5 minutes, I was on board. I said, "Yeah, 5 months, that's great, let's do it. Let's make a film about that." So in the midst of sort of putting this company together, I had some brakes being put on that were like, well, I have 12 employees, I have management responsibilities, so I might be able to come or have some other people there or sort of oversee it. Clearly the universe was not anticipating that I was going to have the responsibilities of that company by the time the walk actually launched. And for me, one of the things, I don't necessarily believe that this is a specific sign, like a pillar in the sky. Although I do think there were some pillars there that I was following by day and by night. But the fact that the company settled and I actually received the check for my portion of the company the day that we left for the walk, I thought was at least an interesting coincidence, if not a greater synergy going on there than I might have given credit. So clearly in my life, what I had expected to be management company employees turned into being on the road for 5 months making a film. Within a year, things had changed that much. And then the process of doing the film was completely unexpected, because when you make a documentary, you really step out into sort of nothing, starting without anything and saying, I think there's probably going to be a story here, but we could have invested 5 months into that. There might have been no story.
Right, yeah. And of course, you never know going into it with a group of Christians who have been praying and discerning that when you go on a walk across country, it'll just be, I'm glad you got to go on a perfectly successful walk with no problems and anything, because God was behind us the whole way, and that means always no problems. So you got to go see this film, Gospel, very successful, and no problems there.
Well, actually, no. I think it was pretty much the opposite of that. First off, I learned way more about all of you than I really needed to know. So.
Yes, I'm counting you on what you're not saying too, as well as what you're saying.
We'll exercise a little bit of discretion. So, and even in that, if you can imagine a group of people who are spending 5 months walking across the country, and all of the things all of the personal struggles that brings in, and then that sort of spiritual relationship that people are having to this process that they're doing. So we had at the beginning people leaving with high hopes for what this was going to be, knowing that there were a few things that weren't tied up. Not all the money's in place. We don't necessarily know how it's going to work out here. We don't know how we'll be received there. We don't know if anybody will pay attention to us. But damn it, we're walking, right? And so halfway through the walk, that sense of certainty, I would say, was pretty much gone. And people were really questioning, is this the right thing to do at all? Did we just make a gigantic mistake? And I think we're gonna look at a clip that we have that is from about halfway through the walk, that we took at Eden Seminary, when somebody said we need to get together and sit down and kind of talk this out, because things are getting interesting, right?
Definitely the low point you've picked of the walk, and you capture on film the one time I've ever sworn too. So you're good at that.
Yeah, and I think that word is used either 4 or 5 times in rapid succession, if I'm not mistaken.
All right, so let's take a look at this clip from the Asphalt Gospel.
What I keep saying to myself is it's so many more weeks. That's all it is. We can do this.
By the 12th week of the walk, some of the physical and mental wear and tear on the walkers was really showing.
It's only this many more weeks. I don't know where the money comes from this fall, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm just kind of saying, okay.
I miss being around people my own age, and I love all of you guys, but it's really hard for me. I don't really know who I am, and I'm trying really hard to figure out what I'm doing and who I am and who I want to be.
I think on Friday, if each of you would have said, you know what, Eric, this walk was just total bullshit, I would have said, my God, you're right. Oh my God, I'm sorry.
Eric, I can assure you this walk is not bullshit. Even the walks that I was on that were bullshit, they were not.
Several people had said to me, you know, people are getting stressed out, we need to talk this through. And I thought to myself, well, if everyone else needs a meeting, we'll have one.
I have never once doubted this should be done. I've every moment doubted how this should be done. And
I needed this meeting more than anyone else. I realized I had all this pent-up stress and emotion, so we were still worrying about our event, we were still worrying about money.
I think we'll have enough money.
It's still hard to watch this many years later, that one point. Yeah.
It was amazing how much tension there was in the room. The thing that I think is interesting, and we're going to play another clip from, this happened about halfway through, so we're going to play a clip from the end. And I think the thing that's really interesting to pay attention to is the little shifts in language. So you have people talking about doubt, not knowing, whether or not the walk is just, you know, total bullshit, right? And having this sort of sense of absolute uncertainty. The interesting thing is, and I do think, you know, we've talked about this, I think if two key people had thrown in the towel at that point, I really think it would have been done. I think we would have canceled and just gone home, because it was really a low point watching what was happening. But versus that, what really happened, I think, is that people leaned into the walk. And so there was a decision that was made that, yes, this is difficult, it's harder than we thought it was going to be, but we're going to move forward. So if we roll that next clip here in just a sec, this is going to be the end of the walk in Washington, D.C., and I particularly picked, there's a lot more that happened in Washington, D.C., but I picked each person that you saw at Eden, and just pay attention to the language shift from people, from what they said in the first clip to what they're saying now in this second clip.
Your banner there.
We are sorry that our silence has allowed fear and narrow-mindedness to drown out the voice of Jesus.
I followed this dream and my feet fell into step.
Far too often we are told the voices which try to separate us and exclude people of different races, classes, or creeds from our national psyche are speaking on behalf of God. Those voices do no such thing.
Amen.
As Christians in America, we really stand at a crossroads. We can either choose to continue to walk in the path of fear and intolerance, the path advocated and practiced by many church leaders these days, or we can choose a new path, the path of love, the path of Jesus.
There's a saying, leap and the net will appear. So I leapt.
Yeah, I think we kind of, in the middle of the walk, it felt like we leapt and fell over a cliff for a bit there. It was actually a much happier scene for most of that walk beforehand, but by that time it had really gotten, you know, there was a lot of wearing out and a lot of press who wasn't interested at all in the story of people, of Christians who were not extremists,
right.
And walking for things like love and compassion and inclusion and so forth.
Bunch of radicals.
Yeah. I think what really kept us going was actually when we were feeling like, oh my gosh, should we throw in the towel? God wasn't ready, and that pillar of fire, that pillar of cloud, you know, that's almost literally true. I mean, that's a great symbol. That it continued to be out there on the road, and it's like, well, what can we do but follow?
I think it's interesting at the end too, if I interpret what was happening with all of you, was that in looking back, there was a sort of a linear sense to it. You could actually see where the decisions that you had made propelled you into a place. It was maybe not exactly what you thought it would be when it was done, but it got you to a place that maybe you had hoped you would get to in a way. And in that last clip, if you think about where you were in Eden, and now you're talking about, you're using the language of walking, coming off of a walk, and talking about what needs to happen in the future. And Katrina, who is talking about not having any sense of herself, is saying, I followed I had a dream and my feet. So she's embracing the idea of walking. And then even Megan at the end, who had no idea she was going to go to seminary and become a UCC minister, which she did, is saying, leap and the net will appear. So the people who were sort of bathed in uncertainty in that middle point when things were really feeling pretty dark, I think in retrospect you were looking and saying, we don't necessarily know what's going from here, but we understand the process that has brought us to this place.
Yeah, absolutely true. And it's really the existence of Darkwood Brew is directly comes from that walk, actually, and the realization that the media is fundamentally uninterested in anything but the battles and extremists, and that we can't rely on the secular media to tell our story and the Christian story the way we feel it should be told. That we have to become the media, and here we are.
Right, here we are.